Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and this is Do You Need That Game, a monthly series I do where I try to take a look at the reviews I've done in the past month, the reviews and sometimes other games I've played that I didn't get a chance to review or just chose not to, and I try to take a critical look at whether you need that game in your collection. More specifically, what other games do the same thing? Do other games do it better? In all cases, I am applying my own biases of what I like and don't like onto those games. I'm applying my own biases of the other comparable games in the board game space that I've played. So there is obviously a limit. I'm just my own experience here. To that end, though, I am specifically trying to give you other options. There's a lot of games that come out every single month, a lot of games that come out every single day, every month, every year, and we have to make choices about what enters or leaves our collection. What games do we get from the new and the shiny, and some games are harder to resist than others. Which means specifically this series is guided towards trying to tell you what felt unique, what games are expensive, what are cheaper alternatives that you can potentially get. And then, yes, many of these games I'm still personally getting and you may still want to get yourself, and that's the nature of the beast. But that is a separate conversation. Let's go ahead and dive into starting off the bat. And I tried to limit my scope of the amount of games I covered this particular video or episode or whatever you want to call it. In past videos in this series, I've looked at a lot of games that I've played and not just games I reviewed, but I'm trying to go in a bit more in depth in each one as far as giving you options and covering that. So let's go ahead, rambling too much, and let's start this off with Agemonia. Agemonia is going to be a game that I believe is currently still on Kickstarter, depending on when this video goes up. But Agemonia is a game that basically offers you RPG exploration in terms of leveling up your characters, choosing story points, going through all of that, engaging in combat, growing your characters, having a degree of narrative, having maps that flip through a book. And this is a good point where it's going to start to feel a bit, if you're familiar with it, like Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, which is relevant because Agemonia is going to be a game that has an entry price point of over €100 once you factor in shipping and everything else to get the game, which means you're comparing that against Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, which will run you around $45 or so. And don't get me wrong, I like Agemonia a lot. I gave it a 4 to 5. I am adding it to my collection, but in terms of if you're trying to be responsible with your money or choose between one game or another, or if you have Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, then I would recommend going through that first. Now, Destinies is going to be another game. Destinies by Lucky Duck Games is going to be another game that gives you, again, to the same extent, the exploration and the story of the game. I get a similar feel from those games as well, but I will say Destinies is going to be lighter on the mechanics. Destinies is going to be lighter on the character growth and development and the campaign feel of it, contrasted with Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. So overall, I think Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion is going to be an accurate comparison to Agemonia in terms of if you're looking for cheaper alternate options. Now again, Agemonia is great. Agemonia is a solid job. I do recommend Agemonia, but if you're trying to be budget conscious, I would recommend Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion first. I should probably note that I haven't actually played Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. I have played Gloomhaven, I haven't played Jaws of the Lion, but I'm specifically trying to give you the cheaper option, and Jaws of the Lion is actually going to be a more comparable comparison, especially with the flipbook and the narrower scope than Agemonia. Next up is going to be Arydia. Arydia is going to be a game that is, well, also was on Kickstarter. It's not currently on Kickstarter, although I'm sure there will be an option to late pledge. But Arydia is going to be by Far Off Games, I want to say. I'm blanking on the name. The company that brought you Zia. Zia the Past We... No, that's Arydia the Past We Dare Tread, and Zia something of a drift... Legend of a Drift System. That's the game. But either way, Arydia is going to be a game which is also giving you a degree of narrative, of combat, of RPG, but does so in a way that, to me, does feel more unique. Perhaps my own bias, perhaps my own limit of what I've played and not played, but Arydia felt like no other board game I have ever played. Arydia to me feels like a PC game, like a video game that you're playing. For better or for worse, because there will be, and this is the part where I can try to convince you away from Arydia, there'll be many people who say, well, then I'll just play a video game. I'll get all that for a cheaper price point and probably a lot more depth, and then also not having to deal with any of the setup, the teardown, and all of that. I'll just play a video game instead. And I think if you have that response, then you absolutely should do that. I think that is the better choice if that is your initial response. On the other hand, if you're like me, if you're someone who's like, well, no, I don't really want to play a video game, I want to play a tactile board game, or I want to share the experience with my friends, and I think Arydia is going to be a game that is best with 2 or 3 players. Totally doable with 1. I do recommend it even with 1, but I think it is going to be best. 2 is going to be the sweet spot for me personally. but it's really going to give you that PC game feel as you wander around different maps, as you interact with different locations, as you have NPCs learning and updating with the world around you, and then yes, as you have exploration, combat, leveling up, all the RPG goodness you want in this very open world, slightly guided, but also open world, sandboxy adventure with different ways you can approach different things, with NPCs that feel like NPCs. It really did a solid job for me as far as I'm concerned. It is a game that, again, in the board game space, no other game I've played has felt like Arydia in the way it feels like a video game, but on your table. For better or for worse, that's the part, because it is an expensive game. It's a game with a price point of $175, like the entry price, maybe $165 plus shipping, whatever it is. It's not a cheap game to get into, which is why price point is going to be the biggest caution I'm going to use. Destiny's is going to be a good example again. Destiny's is going to some extent bring you that exploratory feel that Arydia does, but without a lot of the RPG elements. It will be a lot cheaper, give you a much more condensed version of the experience, a totally different game, but some degrees if you're looking for the story and the exploration as opposed to the RPG campaign, everything else. And then again, video games are an option as well. Then there's going to be Between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig. Between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig is going to be a game that plays between 2 and 7. Does have a solo mode. I think the expansion brings a solo mode to the table. But officially the box says 3 to 7 players with a 2-player variant, and I believe the expansion even adds solo play as well. But it's going to be a game where you're building your castles. It's going to be a game that combines, well, Castle of Mad King Ludwig and Between Two Castles, 2 different game systems, and it brings elements of both as you cooperatively with the players on the left and the right, you build out your castles that you're trying to construct together. Castles that you're going to be placing down different rooms in ways that, as this room goes next to that room, you're going to score points, and if that room goes next to that room, you'll score points, and if this room goes in a line, you'll score points. So you're trying to take all of that into account as you work together with your teammates to build the castles. And if you're wondering what you mean by teammates, well, at the end of the day, your score is going to be the lower of whatever castles you've built. So you're trying to balance how well you build each castle, because if you get 70 points here and 30 points here, well, your score is 30 points. So you're trying to make sure everything is as well balanced as possible, which means this game really genuinely does capture a spirit of teamwork while being competitive. I'm working with you and I'm working with you, but I'm the one who's trying to win. It really has an interesting feel as you work together and win by yourself for the most part. In theory you can tie, but it's unlikely. It hasn't happened to me yet. But as far as other game comparisons, Between Two Castles' greatest strength, in my opinion, is not going to be in the gameplay. The gameplay is good, but I think there's better. If you like that aspect of building out rooms in different ways, my personal favorite is going to be Suburbia in terms of games that really capture the feel of having 15 different scoring combinations as you place this next to that and build out a city. Now, Castle of Mad King Ludwig does it as well. I personally prefer Suburbia. Castle of Mad King Ludwig is arguably rated a drop better, but Suburbia for me is going to be one I recommend, and even Castle of Mad King Ludwig I think does a much better job at that intermingled scoring conditions as you try to take into account a million different things. Now, neither of those bring you the teamwork aspect, which is where I think Between Two Castles shines in combination with the fact that it can play well up to 7 players. This is a game where you can genuinely table with 7, and because of the simultaneous play, it will be marginally longer than a game played with 4 players or 5 players. So you can really have that high player count. Now, as far as high player count games, I'd recommend Ethnos, Seven Wonders, or a variety of other party games or lighter games that can give you a similar experience. Seven Wonders is really going to be my biggest direct comparison as far as a game that can scale well to a high player count while not taking that long either. I think Seven Wonders is an excellent experience that I easily recommend. Ethnos, I think, only goes up to 6, and even then I think it's better with 5 as opposed to 6 starts to feel a little crowded in Ethnos. But overall, while I think Seven Wonders is a better game, well, I will easily pick Seven Wonders over Between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig any day of the week. Where Between Two Castles does stand out is going to be in that feeling of teamwork it gives. Now, for the record, I haven't played the original game Between Two Castles. Like I said already, this game is a combination of Between Two Castles and Castles of Mad King Ludwig. I haven't played Between Two Castles. I can't comment on how that one compares. That one will also give you higher play count games with that feeling of cooperation, but the gameplay itself I can't speak for. But overall, while I do like Between Two Castles, it depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for just games that suit higher player counts, I think Seven Wonders is still my go-to there. But if you're looking for that feeling of cooperation while not actually being on someone's team, this one does do a solid job. Then next up we have Black Rose Wars Rebirth. Now, Black Rose Wars Rebirth is going to have 2 comparisons. The first is going to be Black Rose Wars. If you already have Black Rose Wars, I don't think you need Black Rose Wars Rebirth. They did have some streamlining, some cleaning up, some little minor aspects, both component-wise, rule-wise, sequencing-wise, and then of course new factions, new spells, all of that. none of which is necessary if you own the original Black Rose Wars. The original Black Rose Wars will be just fine on its own, but if you don't own the original Black Rose Wars, if you're looking for other comparisons, then if you're looking for the closest comparison I can really give that gives you that feeling of a board and mages flinging spells at one another as you try to, well, win the game, then Wiz War from Fantasy Flight Games, which is technically a reprint of the original Wiz War, but Wiz War from Fantasy Flight Games, I believe it's 8th edition, is going to be one that very much gives you that similar feel at a much more manageable game and a much smaller price point. Now, it doesn't have the same level of epicness. It won't have amazing miniatures. It will be a limited, scaled-back version of Black Rose Wars, but at the same time, it will give you a lot of experience for a cheaper price point. Now, both those games are going to be fiddly by nature. Both of them are giving you a lot of spell slinging, a lot of fun things you can do, but, like I said, fiddly by nature. If you're looking for that fun appeal of just playing cards and doing things to other players, then there's going to be a variety of other games that won't necessarily give you the same full feel. Like Dice Throne is going to be a great example. A little more head-to-head. You could play it multiplayer, but I do think of it more as a two-player game. Dice Throne is going to give you that two-player head-to-head, just doing magical spell stuff at one another. There's going to be a lot of other games that are more card combat-based that give you a lot of spell slinging and a lot of dealing damage. Even just if you originally go to the original Magic the Gathering, you'll get that feel from that as well. If you're specifically looking for it on a board, then I think Wiz War is going to be the one I compare the most. Again, it might be a little worse or better of an experience depending on who you are and what you're looking for, but it will be much cheaper and scaled back significantly in the scope. Although it does have expansions too if you're looking for that as well. Then we have Dragonbond. Dragonbond is going to be a game, Dragonbond Lords of Vaala, which was on Kickstarter, and it's going to be a game that I most closely compare to Ethnos, actually, which I already talked about this video. Ethnos is going to be a very different game than Dragonbond, and yet the sequencing and the feel of the games felt very similar. Dragonbond's going to be a game where you're basically you're trying to collect power in the game, and you're doing that by marching around the units with either your generals or your dragons, marching around the territories with your generals or your dragons, and then collecting power in this game as you try to plan out your action stack. Now, the game's going to be interesting and different in the sense that generals and dragons can combine. You can have moments in the game where a general and a dragon combine and they became Dragonbond, and now you're operating as a team, you're working together, which will almost inherently incentivize the other players at the table to also combine, because when you combine as a team, you only need 15 power between the two of you, and yet you're still taking full turns, so you really want to get the other players to Dragonbond at that point, which can stagger the game and set it up for certain victory conditions and whatnot. Overall, I think Dragonbond is a game that is simple and yet deep at the same time. It's giving you quick actions, quick turns, quick resolutions, and yet it's giving you like a decent amount of depth while also not giving you all that much game at the same time. It's very interestingly done. Ethnos is going to be the game that I really feel is a direct comparison in the feel of the game, and it's one of those things I can't wait for people to try both games, because I can't tell if I'm delusional, because the gameplay is totally different between the two, and yet they very much do spark the same feel. Dragonbond to me is a game that doesn't shine as being an amazing game, but it does shine as being a game that has fast turns. It has a unique mechanism of the players combining, not totally unique, other games have that as well, but that idea of asymmetric teams where the asymmetric teams can combine but don't necessarily have to. I haven't seen that done a lot. It's going to have, like I said already, quick, fast-paced turns. It's going to have powers and abilities. It's going to have a degree of planning around what you do, how you do it to drive home the win. It's going to play well at higher player counts and play quickly at the same time. Overall, Dragonbond is a solid game, but like I said already, you can pick up Ethnos for like $20 probably. It's on sale frequently, whereas Dragonbond was costing you, it was reasonably priced, but it was still much more expensive than a $20 game. So Ethnos is going to be my cheaper comparison if you're looking for something there. Next up, we have Eos Island of Angels. Eos Island of Angels is going to be a game from Grey Fox Games and well, it's actually from King Raccoon Games, I think in association with Grey Fox, but it's going to be a game that should currently be on Kickstarter at the time of this video, but it's a game that basically gives you tableau building. That's what it does. The whole name of the game for me is going to be the fact that you have asymmetric factions, along with tableau building as you level up and build up your characters in different ways as you play the game, and it's going to be one that's the main appeal for me. There's a driving force as well of trying to get Chronicles in the game, where you try to raise angels and kill demon lords and do a bunch of other things and have interactions on the map. All these things designed to give you Chronicles, and Chronicles ultimately designed to give you points, and points is how you ultimately win the game. But all of that to me is secondary to the fact that my game, the reason I'm playing Eos, is going to be because I'm leveling up different abilities, and I'm leveling up my ship, and I'm combining an asymmetric ship with an asymmetric crew, and just having fun trying to build up and deliver combos in the game. It's combo building and powers and tableaus all built around an engine where I'm trying to actually do something with what I'm building up in the game. As far as comparable games, there's not a lot that immediately comes to mind for me. I mean, classic games that have tableau building that feel infinitely rewarding are going to be Through the Ages, Terraforming Mars, perhaps Deus to a degree. Deus is going to be a slightly different game, much lower rated, but Deus might feel a little bit more similar, although I'm having a hard time exactly abstracting what tableau building games feel similar to EOS. Another game on this list, actually, ThreeTale, which we'll be talking about shortly, is also going to feel a bit like EOS, although that's more of a cooperative game, so already playing in a whole different genre. EOS is a game that I really enjoy. I would say all those three games I mentioned, Through the Ages, Terraforming Mars, and Deus, are going to be solid choices if tableau building is what you're looking for. If the idea of just building up more abilities and combos and all these things as you go through the game, those are all going to be solid recommendations as well. And you can go on Board Game Geek and sort by tableau building and just find highly ranked games, and there'll be a whole chunk of them. There's a lot out there. I enjoy EOS. It's got the asymmetric factions, which makes it a joy to jump into every single time. And that, combined with the unique ship, makes it a different puzzle. And then the board can change every single game as well. And then the various cards and demon lords and angels you interact with. There's a lot going on in the game, but ultimately for me, the appeal and draw is the tableau building. So any game that gives you tableau building should be a suitable substitute or give you that same feeling and experience. Next up, we have Gods Love Dinosaurs from Pandasaurus Games. Gods Love Dinosaurs is going to be a game where you're managing your own little self-contained continent, your self-contained ecosystem, as you try to figure out how to breed different prey and bring on different predators and have the predators eat the prey and spawn more predators and have ultimately the dinosaurs eat all of those. So you're managing your own little ecosystem, trying to keep everything alive long enough for it to be eaten by the next thing higher up the food chain. And I like it. It's a solid game. For me, the game I'd recommend directly compared to it is going to be Ecos from AEG. Ecos First Continent, I believe it's called. And both of them are about ecosystems, hence the name Ecos, I think that's why it's called Ecos. But either way, Ecos is going to be a game where it's going to have a lot of similarities to Gods Love Dinosaurs, but where I think it is better, where I think it is a better recommendation, is going to be the fact that in Ecos, you are working within a shared ecosystem. So you don't have your own little private ecosystem, you have a joined ecosystem, and then the variability is going to be what keeps me coming back to Ecos, versus where Gods Love Dinosaurs, while I really enjoyed it, the lack of variability is why I also am willing to move on from it. Ecos is going to give you tons of different cards, tons of little cards as you try to figure out the balance, the puzzle. Are you putting this creature into the ecosystem that everyone's sharing? Are you building up trees? Are you, I don't know, putting out more water on the board? Are you having your sharks eat someone else's manatees? There's a ton going on in the ecosystem that you develop and build together in Ecos. Now, where Ecos is going to be not the better pick for you is if you don't like the fact that you are on a shared ecosystem. I can have my sharks eat your dolphins, I assume. I don't actually know if sharks eat dolphins, but I can have some creature eat another creature or stomp out another creature. I can have the land masses split and twist and mess up in ways that might ruin your plans. And so to that end, Gods of Dinosaurs is going to be a slightly better recommendation if you prefer the self-contained nature, so you don't feel as victim to the other players intruding on your own space. But if you want the variability and if you want what I think is a better game system, I like Ecos First Continent from AEG. Next up, we have Master of the Universe. Master of the Universe, Clash for Eternia by Command Games, another game that's currently on Kickstarter. A lot of these are currently on Kickstarter. But Master of the Universe, Clash for Eternia, the only real direct comparison I have for that is going to be a game from, well, Command themselves, called The World of Smog, Rise of Moloch, which Master of the Universe, Clash for Eternia, and The World of Smog, Rise of Moloch. What is with these long names? Those two names are ridiculously long. But either way, let's call it, Eternia and Moloch. Eternia and Moloch are going to be games that very much have a lot of the same key ingredients. Both of them are giving you a lot of the same overlap in terms of the way power is managed, in terms of the way power is passed to the Overlord character, and the asymmetric factions, and the way you deal with minions on the board, and you manage both the Overlord character has both your units as well as their spells and abilities. They have their minions that are constantly moving around. They have escape damage you're managing. They have different objectives you're trying to go for. They're going to have a lot of common DNA between the two games, although they are also vastly different at the same time. I'm not ready to tell you which one I prefer just yet, but what I will say is if you do have Moloch, if you do have the World of Smog, Rise of Moloch already, and you're trying to be budget conscious, I don't think you need Clash for Eternia. It's a solid game, but it's going to give you enough of the same high notes that if you have one, you're probably getting a lot of overlap as it stands. As far as other game systems, for the most part, despite being a one versus many experience, despite the fact that Clash for Eternia is ultimately a one versus many, which means you can play one versus one, you can play one versus two, you can play one versus three or four or five. Actually, it's not true. I think you can play one versus four, I think is where it caps out. But either way, it's going to be a game that ultimately comes down to being a skirmish game. So any other skirmish game system with powers and abilities and dice rolling and variable characters will to some extent give you the same game system, the same game feel. And CMON alone has tons of games that are in that genre of, rolling dice, multiple characters, tons of options. Just like Arcadia Quest is going to have some degree of overlap as well. Not tons of dissimilarities. There's going to be some degree of overlap, although I didn't particularly like Arcadia Quest, and I do like Moloch and Master of the Universe, so I don't have a direct comparison there. But yeah, anything that gives you a skirmish game with dice rolling, card play, powers, and abilities will already have a degree of overlap, but like I said, Moloch is going to be the closest comparison for me. Next up, we have Mythic Mischief. Mythic Mischief, which is another game currently on GameFound. This one might be over already. I'm not sure yet, although I'm sure there'll be a late pledge at some point. But either way, Mythic Mischief by IV Games is going to be an abstract strategy game, although more specifically it is a game that to quote another video I have, it feels like an abstract strategy game. I'm not entirely certain it falls perfectly into that category, because you also have powers and abilities, it also plays well at 2, 3, and 4 players, it also has a timed blitz mode, so that for every little thing I can point at that makes me think of Mythic Mischief as an abstract game, I can point to something else that makes me feel like it's not really an abstract game. But either way, it's going to be a game which you're managing. Well, the Tome Keeper is going to be this librarian on the board trying to hunt down various students as you take on different factions of students in this game. And through your abilities, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be managing your asymmetric set of abilities to move your own students, to move walls, to move other students, and to move the Tome Keeper as well, as plus other abilities as well, all guided towards trying to figure out which pathway the Tome Keeper is going to take, how they're going to move, and how they're going to capture other students while avoiding you. It is an incredibly solid system, an incredibly solid puzzle to figure out. The direct comparisons of games that I think are going to somewhat fill the same slot are going to be Santorini and Tak, which are the two favorite abstract games in my collection. Now, they're not entirely similar. I would say the tactical nature of Mythic Mischief more lines up with Tak, of the tactical nature of trying to get caught or catch your opponent out as you try to outmaneuver them. Both of them have that battle of wits feel to them. Santorini is going to be a drop different in terms of the overall feel, but Santorini gives me the asymmetric powers and abilities as you have a core system, and then you have different powers or different gods you can play out that will then modify that core system. They give you slightly different puzzles or ways of breaking the core system to help you win in the game. And so that's going to be where that overlaps. And then a third game that will have a small degree of overlap is going to be Corridor. Corridor is going to be an older game by, I think, Gigamic Games or Gigamic Games. I never know how to pronounce that company. But Corridor is going to give you wall building. Every single turn you're going to move a pawn and or put a wall on the board. The design is going to be trying to get your pawn to the other side of the board, but placing down the walls in ways that hinder your opponent more than they hinder you, and it's a constant balance of every wall you place could be doing both. Put the wall behind you, you're hindering your opponent, but you might want to spend that time moving a space forward instead. So there's going to be, again, a degree of overlap, especially if you're focusing on the puzzle of the walls and the movement of the Tome Keeper, as well as your own students in the game. All three of those games, all that said, do not feel like Mythic Mischief. Mythic Mischief feels very unique. It feels very much like its own beast, and it's a game I would absolutely recommend, except for the fact that it's also more expensive. And so you can get Santorini and Tak, and possibly Corridor. You can possibly get all three of those games for the price of Mythic Mischief. For sure, any two of them. Which does put me in the position of saying, hey, I love Mythic Mischief. It's an amazing game that I keep on playing, but also it's expensive. So maybe try those other ones first. Maybe see which ones are fit for you. Now, Corridor is going to be my least recommended, that's the word I'm looking for. Corridor is going to be my least recommended from those three, but still giving you a degree of the same feeling. So all those three are going to be solid choices, solid options. And then, of course, there's a host of other abstract games out there in the ecosystem. The GIF series is going to be a solid line of games to look into. Although, again, Mythic Mischief, not 100% an abstract. Next up, we have Renature. Renature is going to be a game from Capstone Games from Michael Kiesling and Wolfgang Kramer, and it's going to be a game that is ultimately Dominoes the board game. Dominoes the board game with a dash of area control thrown in, and while it is a relaxing experience, I don't know if I really recommend it unless you particularly like dominoes. Now, I don't have direct recommendations for Renature over here. Renature is solid. I enjoy it. It's fun. It'll last for some time, maybe. I don't know. I don't actually know if it's staying in my collection or leaving just yet. I'm still willing to play it. But it's got that peaceful nature, that aspect of you pull a domino, you have a little hand of dominoes, you pick a domino, place it down, match it with another creature. The dominoes aren't numbers, they're all different creatures. Match up an owl with an owl, match up a squirrel with a squirrel, a bat with a bat, and try to figure out how to build out a little system of animals in this nature environment while also managing a degree of area control. Plant your trees in a way that you can control the areas and get more points than your opponent by game's end. It is light, it is fun, it is breezy, it is light, fun, and breezy, but also relies on dominoes as the core mechanism and has all the luck attached to it that dominoes does. You are stuck placing your domino wherever it is able to be placed. You don't have a ton of control. You have some control, some mitigation, but for the most part, it is a game that has more of a, what's the word for it? A Zen-like feel as you play it, as opposed to a, hey, I'm going to play a game and try to win-like feel. It's more about the Zen-ness. And in fact, in a weird way, the Zen-ness is almost ruined by how mean and brutal the area control parts can be. I don't think it's immensely tactical and amazing. I think it just has a Zen-like feel combined with a meanness that puts it in a weird place as far as recommending it. It's a good game. I enjoy it, but I don't know if I recommend it. It's a good game that I enjoy, that I might not recommend. Let's go with that. Anyways, moving on, we have Sheepy Time. Sheepy Time from AEG is going to be a push-your-luck family-style game centered around the idea of nightmares. You want to try to outlast the nightmares. You run around the board trying to gain points, sleepy points, or whatever they're called, before the wolf wakes you up and before you are awake from your nightmare. And it's a solid game, but if you want a push-your-luck experience that is family-friendly, I'll recommend Ink and Gold, Captain Carcass, or Can't Stop easily before Sheepy Time. I enjoy Sheepy Time. I think it's a good game. I just think Can't Stop is going to be a solid game that I could recommend to any family, both in terms of just learning numbers, in terms of the fun of not being able to stop and pushing your luck. A Captain Carcass is going to have a little bit more nuance to powers and abilities and things, but could give you good artwork and fun little things and a little degree of just really trying to get a little further. And then Ink and Gold is going to be probably my least recommended from those three, but still giving you a solid little, hey, dive into the jungle and try to push a little more to get a few more things. I like Sheepy Time. I just don't think it's necessarily the best in the push your luck genre compared to other games you could be adding to your collection that are still family friendly at the same time. Solar Sphere. Solar Sphere is another game that's probably going to be on Kickstarter, and this is going to be a heavier dice placement game, which means I'm going to be comparing it to other heavier games that have dice placement in them, or some degree of dice management, of picking certain dice, utilizing them. Games like Coimbra, like Tzolk'in, like Castle of Burgundy, Voyages of Marco Polo, Teotihuacan, Bora Bora. There's a host, a bevy of solid games that exist already. Castle of Burgundy is going to be my first pick there. If you want to feel like you're rolling dice and placing them and utilizing and building up an engine, you should have Castle of Burgundy in your collection. Castle of Burgundy is going to give you that engine building, that feel, while giving you a degree of game weight, of serious decisions, and tons of depth, all wrapped up in it. Now, Solar Sphere is good. Solar Sphere is fun, but if you don't have Castle of Burgundy in your collection, I recommend that one first. Then possibly Coimbra, Voyages of Marco Polo. Those are going to be solid additions. Us is going to be Tzolk'in, Bora Bora, Teotihuacan, and there are a bunch more that I'm not necessarily thinking of offhand. There's a lot of games out there that are heavier Euro games. What's it called? We have Grand Austria Hotel is going to be another one. There's a ton of games out there that give you heavy engines in them as you try to figure out how to manipulate this into that before your timer's up, before you run out of time and have to basically weigh up your points and win. Solar Sphere is fun. It has dice placement, building up a Dyson sphere in the middle of the table while fighting off enemy drones or whatnot, or utilizing the various drones, or you're utilizing drones to modify your dice, to place your dice where other people are going. It's going to have dice placement in it. But overall, I just think there are solid groupings of other games that already exist that are incredibly well rated, that are worth checking out if you're really craving something new for your collection. Then we have the Artemis Odyssey. The Artemis Odyssey is going to be another Kickstarter game. Lots of these this month. Artemis Odyssey is going to be a Kickstarter game from Grand Gamers Guild. It's a reprint of Ad Astra while also being a spiritual successor to the Artemis project. And overall, it's a game where you have simultaneous action selection. You're going to be placing cards down into a row, which is going to allow others to take different actions, yourself and others to take actions, although your cards will potentially benefit yourself more because you have more choice or agency, and sometimes just straight up more rewards over how you get benefited from that card you play. So it's going to have that degree of, you play a card, everyone benefits. You choose the role, and we can all travel, we can all build, we can all score points, but based on the way you choose to leave the round. And so direct comparisons are going to be the Race for the Galaxy and Ares Expedition, Terraforming Mars, Ares Expedition. Both those, I think, are going to be games that are better rated games. Keep in mind, Ad Astra is going to be a game that's in the high 6s on Board Game Geek. It's not even a 7. It's a good game, but not necessarily a great game. And the Artemis Odyssey feels like it is continuing that it's a good game, but not necessarily a great game. Race for the Galaxies and Ares Expedition, I think, are going to fall far more in the categories of great games, far more in the category of games that give you that simultaneous action selection, that roll phase as you try to figure out how you're going to play something that everyone's going to do, but you're going to do it better, faster, and end up with more victory points than any other player. Race for the Galaxy and Ares Expedition, I think, will do that better. Perhaps at the cost of a little bit less of a board situation that Artemis Odyssey will give you, but giving you most of the other engine around that instead. Then we have the Whatnot cabinet. The Whatnot cabinet by Pencil First Games is going to be a game of, well, set collection, which is standard for the Pencil First universe. They have a lot of games that give you set collection, little degrees of hard choices as you figure out both a slight puzzle of the mechanics that give you at play to choose the set collection you're engaging with, as well as the actual ways you're going to score points in the game. Now, other direct comparisons, in this case, you're trying to build out your cabinet. You have a little cabinet, a 3x4 cabinet. You're trying to collect various seashells and animals and different things that are going to go into your Whatnot cabinet, all designed to give you different points, scoring points for like rows or completely dislike rows, as well as other different scoring objectives. It's going to, again, have a little Zen-like feel to the set collection. It's going to feel not that dissimilar to Herbaceous by Whatnot cabinet. It's going to feel not that dissimilar to a game called Spirit of the Wild, although that's a game that's really a two-player only game. It'll feel a bit like Colorado, although Colorado is a much meaner game, even if it does have the core mechanic of set collection. And it will also feel a drop similar to the Calico Cascadia Verdant series of games by Flatout Games, but those again are going to be heavier games that give you more scoring manipulations at play. I think the Whatnot cabinet is going to be one of the better set collection games I can recommend if you specifically want something more light-natured. Something that has choice, something that has winners and losers and has a degree of trying to figure out how to win, but is more of a lighter puzzle. Something that's a little bit more of a, it's been a long day, I don't want to think too hard, I just want to play a game and try to win without actually caring that much about who really wins. To that end, I think Whatnot cabinet is a solid choice. If you want something meaner, I recommend Colorado, which will be a really cheap game that gives you tense set collection at the same time. And if you want something that will give you a little bit more of the breeziness, but while giving you more to manage scoring-wise, then I'd recommend Cascadia from Flatout Games. And if you just want to feel like you don't get the piece you want, then I'd recommend Calico by Flatout Games. Next up, we have ThreeTale. ThreeTale, a game which I believe just recently relaunched on Kickstarter. And ThreeTale is a game that it's a hard one to come up with direct comparisons, direct, recommendations for it, but if what appeals to you with ThreeTale, let's take a step back. ThreeTale is a game where you're going to be going through different phases in the game, but the general idea of the game is you're building out a map, placing down different tiles, and then wandering and exploring the map to collect different attributes to power and level up your characters in this cooperative game so that you can then wander into the future and tackle it together, or the present, the past, I can't remember how it works. So you wander into one phase of the game to basically finish the game and win once you've actually successfully leveled up your characters far enough in the game. Now, ThreeTale is a game that there's no direct comparisons as far as games that I can recommend that feel exactly like it. If you like the tile-laying exploration aspect of the game, then Carcassonne or any game like it will do a solid job giving you that experience. Versus if you're looking for the power-up feeling of the game, because in my review of ThreeTale, we basically jokingly refer to it as ThreeTale, the stat-building game, because it's a game where, to me, the fun of the game is all about building out your stats. To me, the fun of the game is all about collecting these different virtues and building and developing up your character, both in the symmetrical way where all the characters are the same, as well as the asymmetrical way where they each come to the table with their own unique player powers. That's the fun of the game. The rest of the game is just a canvas that I'm building upon, but it's all about the stat building. It's all about how can I level up so that I can then encounter the world and survive, which will help me further level up in the game. To a small degree, it will feel similar to EOS, although, again, cooperative versus competitive and totally different. But just if stats are just the thing you're looking for, then, again, similar to EOS, I'll recommend Terraforming Mars, I'll recommend Through the Ages if you just like the idea of stat building, although, again, neither of those are cooperative. I don't have any game that really falls into the combination of all of those. Cooperative, tile laying, stat building. ThreeTale does do it fairly uniquely and fairly well, being both an amazing solo experience and an amazing 3-player experience, a iffy 2-player experience. Playable at 2, but not where I'd recommend it based on my experience with it. Overall, I think ThreeTale is a solid game. If stat building the game appeals to you, and if you like cooperative and you like what you heard, then I would recommend it because, again, I don't have a direct comparison to it. It's not cheap. It's a little on the pricey side. It's not ridiculously expensive, but it's a little on the pricier side. Going to be running you, I can't remember, it depends on the Kickstarter. I haven't looked at the relaunch Kickstarter yet, but it's going to be somewhere in the range of $50, $60 plus for the base entry pledge. So there are other games out there, but if the cooperative stat building the game appeals to you, then I would recommend ThreeTale. Next up, we have Trickshot. Trickshot's going to be a sport game that I can't really recommend a direct comparison. So, for context here, Trickshot's going to be a hockey game in which it's going to be a push-your-luck skirmish game. That's as far as the mechanics. The theme is hockey. The mechanics are push your luck skirmish. You're going to be rolling dice and taking actions, and every time you take another action, you roll more dice that can potentially influence your chances of failure. So the game is a constant degree of, I can take more actions and get more done, but then there's more chances for things to go wrong. And do I want to end where I can control the end state, or do I want to keep pushing where I can potentially get more done, but may end up pushing too far and not being ready next round and walking away with the puck flying across the ice and me not having control over how things play out? There are hard decisions to be made in Trickshaw, but it all comes down to skirmish and push your luck. And then in terms of comparisons, I don't have a ton. There's not a lot of sports games that I have played that I can really compare this to. It might be similar to Blood Bowl. I wouldn't know. I haven't played it. It might be similar to Myth and Goal to a certain extent. The Myth and Goal from Blacklist Games, which is going to be an upcoming Kickstarter, it does feel a drop similar, but very, very abstracted. I wouldn't really compare them, but they have a drop of overlap. I haven't played enough games in the sports genre to really have good comparisons to Trickshot. I would say that ultimately it is push your luck skirmish. Your players don't die, your players don't get hurt. They can get to the penalty box, so technically it has wounds and injuries and things like that, but it is primarily about the tactical movement on the grid, the tactical navigation of how you move your characters around to deal with any situation offensively or defensively, while maintaining the spirit and the theme of hockey. Although the push your luck feels out of place. The push your luck just feels like it's the mechanic they need to throw onto the game to make it work. It does work, to be clear, but it doesn't necessarily feel like hockey and push your luck. But overall, Trickshot, I don't really have good comparisons to this one. What I will say is, if I'm trying to disincentivize you from getting it, is it's currently fairly expensive. This is not a game that has a wide retail availability. I believe they have plans for a second Kickstarter. That's where you'll have to start making choices about where to spend your money. For right now, it's just expensive enough on the secondhand market that I'd recommend just checking out other games instead. And then lastly, we have Verdant from Flatout Games. Now, Verdant, if you already watched, I had on this channel already last week a Play This Not That video where I compared Verdant to Calico and Cascadia, all three of the Flatout Games design, and I'm going to repeat the high notes here. First of all, I recommend watching that video. My opinion, while it is my opinion, is not necessarily shared by others. In fact, it specifically is not shared by everyone in that video. So if you want a mix of diverse opinions, I recommend that video. But past that, Verdant's going to be a game where the direct comparisons in terms of the games that most closely feel like it are going to be Calico and Cascadia. In fact, Verdant really feels like they took Cascadia and they took Calico and then combined aspects of both and brought you Verdant. And for myself, while that sort of works, it also means that I kind of personally prefer Calico and prefer Cascadia. I like all three of these games, to be very clear, but for myself, I prefer the open world breeziness and just do what I want of Cascadia while trying to manage different scoring objectives and getting as many points as possible. And then if I want tight, heavy, fit it all into a grid and make it work, I prefer Calico. It's a little more punishing, but I like that feeling of tenseness even as I don't like it both at the same time. Whereas if none of those feel like for what you're looking for, if you're looking for something breezier and lighter, well, we already talked about it. Whatnot Cabinet's going to give you a lighter experience than Verdant will. Verdant's giving you, all that aspect of it's all about choosing different things to try to manage your scoring grid with art by Beth Sobel. Speaking of which, Whatnot Cabinet will also have art by Beth Sobel. But either way, I would recommend Pencil First Games is going to be a great company to look at if you want the feeling of what Flatout Games does, but with a little less tenseness in the mix, then Pencil First Games is going to be a solid addition. But past that, if you're looking for comparisons, I would say if you already have Cascadia and Calico, my own personal opinion is that you don't need Verdant, but I would recommend watching that Play This Not That video. It's a good reminder that everything I said in this video is very much my own opinion, and it will not be something that's shared by everyone and anyone and everyone out there in the gaming universe. That is it. That is going to be the games we have this week. A whole bunch of variety of comparisons of different options on the table for games you may already have in your collections or alternative options to look at instead. Sometimes based on which games I think did it better, sometimes based on which games might have been cheaper, and sometimes just based on what games you might already have in case you're thinking, do you really need that game? If you have Gods Love Dinosaurs and you're looking at Ecos, then do you really need both, or vice versa? If you have Ecos and you're looking at Gods Love Dinosaurs, you may not need both. If you have Cascadia, do you need Verdant? I don't necessarily no, perhaps not. If you have Black Rose Wars, you definitely don't need Black Rose Wars Rebirth. If you have Seven Wonders and you have Between Two Castles, do you really need to add Between Two Castles Mad King Ludwig to your collection? You may have your bases already covered. If you have Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion, Agemonia might be tempting, but do you need to spend another €100 to get that game? And if you like this series, then I do have on my Patreon, I do have a series. It's a $5 tier Patreon, but every single week, whenever I do my to-back or not-to-back video, I also have a Patreon adjacent video called Unfair and Unbalanced, where I take the same approach to all the Kickstarters coming out, where I try to convince you not to back the Kickstarters based on price, based on mechanics, based on anything I can possibly think of, based on other games that might be relevant or whatnot. In any case, I hope you enjoy this video. Once again, this is Do You Need It? My monthly series trying to show you what else is out there and compare things in a way of, well, limiting what you might be adding to your collection. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and I hope you have a good one.